Does your new business need expensive professional services like CPAs and lawyers and consultants? That's a question that I get asked all the time. I'm Doc John, the Entrepreneur Professor, and I am an entrepreneur and I teach entrepreneurship at a major university. And oftentimes when someone's starting a new business, they're concerned that they set things up right to make sure they get their taxes right and a lot of their legal risk is protected. These are great questions, but there are different ways to approach these things. And in this video, I'm going to give you 4 questions to consider when you think about hiring these types of professionals. I'll also share what it is that I do when I'm starting a new business. And finally, I'll walk through some options you have to hedge your risk without having to overspend on these types of services early. So let's get into it. When it comes to hiring professional services like attorneys or CPAs, I like to ask 4 questions to consider whether it's the right time for this. And I should say here, this is not intended to be legal advice or financial advice. Your specific situation is always going to dictate whether you need these types of services. And I do think there's a lot of value in hiring these types of resources, but I've seen many small businesses or new businesses start to engage in very expensive professional services long before they're needed. So let's walk through 4 questions you can ask to make sure that it's the right time and you're getting the right level of resource for the kind of business you're doing. One of the first questions I like to ask is, are you making any money yet? If the answer is yes, you have a little bit more latitude to be able to hire more expensive professional services and know that you're doing so with revenue that you're already starting to generate with the business. But you also have to weigh, is the cost of the service going to be as much or more than this business could make in the first 3, 6, 9, 12 months? And so this is really important to know, how much money are you making already? Oftentimes, when you're just starting a business, you're not making any money yet. And so it can be helpful to have expert resources, but you can also do a lot of your own homework and keep these costs low early on. A second question I always like to ask, and I always suggest that people ask, is there a risk that you might cause harm through this business? And of course, you're not going to naturally go into something that will cause harm, but there's always the possibility. And if there is that risk, that could be the kind of things that point you to a more expensive professional early, because you want to make sure you're taking steps to avoid these risks and also to mitigate for them. Some examples might be if you're creating a consumer product that might in itself cause some kind of physical harm to individuals. Something that has small parts that might be swallowed by a child, or something that has sharp edges that could cause injury. These are the kinds of things that you have to think about that may be ones you need to get some input about what might be involved. And is there a risk that it could cause harm? What do I need to do to protect myself from that risk? A third question is, do you have intellectual property to protect? Or is there any kind of risk you might be infringing on someone else's intellectual property? This is one where you can do a lot of your own homework. The state government or the federal government often publishes a lot of detail about the expectations when it comes to intellectual property protection, and you can learn about this on your own before hiring a professional. But if your business is going to be highly dependent on intellectual property that you've developed, and you want to be able to protect that, it can be a good idea to reach out and get some input from a professional who really understands this and has expertise and certification in this space. Some examples might be if you're an artist and you're creating artwork, you want to make sure that you're able to maintain the intellectual property of that artwork. There's been a lot of controversy in the past year or so about artificial intelligence. And once you've created something using AI technologies, are you able to protect that intellectual property? Also, if you're developing a specific type of content, you may want to be able to put that into a framework that you can trademark or register as a trademark. And so at some point, you'll want to make sure that you engage with the right types of resources to help you do that. This also comes up a lot with technology. If you're inventing a new technology or you're writing software code, being able to protect that may be very important in helping you to be able to make money on it in the future and make sure that you have the rights to even use it. So this question can be really important in helping to figure out if you need to have that professional advice legally or financially early on in your startup process. A fourth question I think is important to ask is, do you have partners or investors? If you're starting as a solopreneur and it's your own company, the dynamics are a lot less complex than if you're partnering with someone else. If you have a co-founder or you're part of a group of people who've come together to start a business. Or if you're asking for investors to give you money to get started. These situations are going to create more complexity in terms of the tax structure and the legal structure of the business and the steps that you need to take to make sure that everyone's interests are accounted for. So these are some of the questions that can help you early in determining whether you need to hire expensive advisory resources early or whether you can do some of your own homework and don't require this level of resource early on in your startup journey. So here's what I do when I start a new business. A lot of times, if I'm coming up with a business idea, I have an idea of some group of individuals, what I call a customer segment, that all fit a particular persona or avatar, and they have a problem. And I'll come up with an idea of something that might solve that problem. But early on, I'm not sure if it's a business idea that's even going to work. I'm not sure if I've really defined the right group of people. I'm not sure if the problem is even one they want to solve. I also don't know for sure whether the solution I could create would be any different than others that are available in the market today. These are all questions that I'm going to explore as I enter the build, measure, learn cycle and start to invent new ideas or come up with new business models. So at this stage, I want to minimize how much I'm investing in the business because I'm not even sure it's going to be a business. I got advice early on in my entrepreneurship career from an accountant who said, if you're just getting started and you really don't have a lot of these things figured out, the first thing to do is open a new bank account. It doesn't even have to be a business account. It can be a personal account. But by doing that, what happens is you can keep all the transactions related to the business or the idea in one place. Your bank statement actually becomes like a mini profit and loss statement. Every time you put money into it, whether that's your investment or whether it's revenue from a revenue stream of some sort for the business, you're seeing where the money's coming from. And anytime you spend money and draw money out of the bank account, that then becomes a record of your costs and your expenses. So this can be the simplest way to get started is open a bank account and just handle all the transactions of the business through that bank account. So when I do it, I open a bank account and I put in what I consider to be my initial investment. It may only be $50 or a few $100s at first as I'm testing an idea. And later I might just close that bank account if the business idea doesn't go anywhere. Very early on, if it looks like the business idea has some legs and it looks like I'll probably move forward with it, I'll set up an LLC, a limited liability corporation. This is very simple to do, at least in the state where I live, and usually is not very expensive if you do it yourself. State websites are usually set up to make this process very easy and simple. And of course, you may want to get some legal consultation as you do this to make sure this is the right vehicle for you, but it can be a good way to make sure your personal liability is protected and you're providing some structure for your business. And once you've established an LLC, you can open a business bank account in the name of that LLC just by taking the paperwork into the bank. And so this is where you can start to give the business its own identity. The next thing I do is when I start to engage my first customer and I'm getting ready to or I need to invoice them for the first time, this is when I set up some kind of a software package that will help me to manage my bookkeeping and expenses. For me, QuickBooks has been the easiest way to do that. I'm now familiar with it, and the QuickBooks online program is very inexpensive as a monthly fee. And you can save money by purchasing an annual subscription, but I actually stay with a monthly subscription early on because even though I'm paying a little bit more overall, if I decide the business isn't right in 3, 6, 9 months, I can still close that down and not have spent as much money on the bookkeeping software. And so this is a way I keep expenses low early, not just with bookkeeping software, but other things like website hosting sites and those kinds of things. The monthly fee is a little bit higher than if you paid annually, but at the same time, you don't have to put that cash out. You can keep that capital to drive the business forward. And if these become your hurdle rate for what kind of income and revenue you need to generate each month to get to where you're profitable. And so keeping these small monthly fees rather than having big annual outlays help to really keep that hurdle rate low for when you break even and start making money. Particularly if you have a service type of business like a coaching business or a consulting business or even just like a personal services type of a business, you can get to where you're making profit over all of your expenses very, very quickly. So this is one of the ways I do that to make sure that I keep the investment in the business low until it's really up and running. Later, I may upgrade or renew at an annual rate for these to save money, but only after there's enough revenue in the business coming in to cover these costs. At this point, once I've added this bookkeeping software, I use the bank statement from that original bank account that I opened to be able to enter all of the expenses. I have a clean record of every expense that's gone through that bank account right on the statement. I have the date of the transaction. I'm likely to know exactly what the transaction is and how much it is, and I can enter that into the bookkeeping software as I'm setting it up. Now, I might reach out to a bookkeeper or a CPA to get some advice on setting up the chart of accounts in the bookkeeping software, or if there's any things to think about just to make sure I'm doing things the right way. But generally, this is very easy to do on your own as long as you understand what these settings mean, and you can get some advice on how to set those up in a very modest way, or even do some of your own homework. So these are just some of the things I do so that I can focus on setting up the business. I don't have to worry too much at the early stage about the financials of the business, because until the business starts to really connect with customers and customers are starting to pay me and generate revenue streams, I haven't made commitments that are going to be irreversible when it comes to legal and financial decisions going forward. At least that's the risk I'm willing to take. And so these are some things to think about as ways you can get started early, you can get started inexpensively, and you can really reduce the amount of expert advisory service expenditure you need to make as you're getting started. In the end, you would hire an expert advisory service resource because you want to keep your risks low, or you want to address your risks and make sure you're not making decisions now that'll have adverse effect later. So I want to walk through several options that you have to help to hedge these risks. And again, this is not comprehensive, and I'm not an attorney and I'm not a CPA, so it's not legal advice or financial advice. You have to figure out what works for you, but just want to walk through some things to think about that can help you to mitigate these risks. The first thing I'll say is a 1-hour consultation can go a long way. If you do need to hire an expensive resource, they will almost always have an hourly rate where you can say, I would like to pay you for your hourly rate for your time. And lawyers can be anywhere from $200 or $300 to $700 or $800 an hour. Accountants can be similarly costly. So even though this may be a big expenditure, buying 1 hour of their time and getting their initial perspective can be money well spent, and at the same time can save getting into extensive retained services fees that you may not be ready for yet. Ideally, find someone that has this type of a setup that can be recommended by a friend or an entrepreneur that you know that can say, I've used this person and found their advice to be really valuable. That's always what I do, is I reach out through my network if I'm looking for this type of a resource. Ideally, over time, you'll develop these relationships for yourself and you'll have a person that you can call. I find a lot of times someone in this type of a role will even spend 15 minutes or half an hour with you and give you some preliminary advice just to kind of help you get started in what you need to think about. And they may even say, I don't think you really need my services yet, but I'd love to work with you when you are. And so this can be a way to just explore without having to have a lot of expense or even any expense at all. In terms of financials, bookkeeping services can be a good alternative when you're getting started to a costly accounting firm or a CPA, because they're going to know the things you need to set up in your bookkeeping structures to help you get started, and they're going to be aware of the things you need to be thinking about. They also may be able to tell you when you're in a situation where you really do need to sit down with that expensive advisory resource for an hour and get that input. But oftentimes they can say, here are 2 or 3 things that you can do. Here are the things people think about, and ultimately you make the decision, but you can have some of that input from someone that is experienced in this area. For legal considerations, you can use inexpensive monthly services like LegalZoom that can give you access to databases of information or even training materials or other resources that can help you to do your own homework, and even give you the opportunity on a limited basis to call and talk to an advisory expert who can give you input, but not be in a situation where you're having to pay large exorbitant fees for that early advice. You also may find that there are nonprofit organizations or state or federal organizations that are designed to help entrepreneurs get started and have free resources. SCORE is a good example of this. This is retired executives and retired entrepreneurs who are really volunteering their time to help new entrepreneurs get started, and there are no fees for this service once you get accepted into the program. The State Business Association, or the SBA, can also be a good resource. Universities often have incubators with free resources to help entrepreneurs get started, and you may be able to go to a free legal clinic or financial clinic to get this kind of advice. So there are lots of ways that you can get the kind of input you need while you're bootstrapping the business and trying to keep the costs low. All of these things point to the fact that it's really important to do your own homework before engaging services. The more you know, the less you're dependent on an expert advisory resource that's very expensive to be teaching you things that you could find out on your own. So doing your own homework can be a really good way to keep these costs low. Finally, another really good way to get input on these from knowledgeable individuals is to form a relationship with a banker and an insurance broker. These are individuals that have a vested interest in getting to know you and working with you, and they're providing services where they will benefit from your success. So it means that they're going to have a particular perspective on what your question is, but a lot of times they can point you to the right people or resources to help you make the connections you need to make sure you're using the right kinds of advice at the right time. So going to your local bank and letting them know that you're starting a business and you would like to just interact with someone who works with small businesses like yours. Because usually there's someone in the bank who has this specialty, and they're going to have relationships with other entrepreneurs in the area. They're also going to have relationships with accountants, lawyers, and other advisory resources where they can make introductions at the right time. And their interest is going to be in helping you succeed. And so this can be a good way to get that kind of input. An insurance broker can be another really good relationship to build. And what you want to do is find someone that's reputable. Maybe it is connected to someone you know well, a valued client of theirs, so that they're going to have a reason to want to make sure that they're investing in you early, even if you're not in the right place to purchase their insurance policies and services. Though your type of business may require that early on. And so this can be someone that can help you to figure out where your risk points are, the types of protections that are available, and the kinds of insurance policies and other protections you may want to put in place to manage your risk that's the right size for your business. And so this can also be someone that has a lot of connections in your business community that can help you connect with expert advisory resources when you need it. Oftentimes, they can also connect you with other types of businesses that would either benefit from your services or be good partners for the kind of business that you have. Measuring risk is important, but you don't need to borrow trouble. And so that's the thing to think about when you're considering engaging with expensive advisory expert services like accountants and lawyers and consultants, because they're going to be able to help you think of any possibility of what can go wrong and how to address that risk. And they play a very important role in the business world as a result. However, as you're just getting started, you want to make sure that you're using these types of services at the right time and the right level. So do your homework, keep good records, and initiate relationships with those that are willing to invest in your business success early. Start small and keep going.